The history goes way back, roughly 1624, to King Charles and Chief Passaconaway. There was an individual called Peter Weir. He decided to buy the land on the north side of Cape Nuduk. It was called Nuduk at the time, it's Nedic. But America was occupied by Native Americans. They were kind of upset that the English were coming in here and thinking they could just take over. The chief of the Pinnacooks, Chief Passaconaway, as far as he was concerned, they lived here. So there was some real difficulties to sell property. Chief Passaconaway finally acquiesced, and so then the sales started happening. The way they sold them was with a patent. It was called a patent. The patent was like a deed. It wasn't a deed back then. They didn't call it a deed. They called it a patent. So Peter Weir and John Gooch just started to buy property from the king, right? And now, why is that important? Because the Weir family is still here. They're still not a quarter of a mile away from me right now. And they're probably the longest living family, descendants, that have ever lived in the United States. That was 500 years. They've been living in the same, essentially the same house for 500 years. In 1890, an individual by the name of Cornelius Vermeil asked if he could buy 400 acres in order to build a private community on the coast of Maine. He decided to create the Newport of the North here in Maine. And that's what this York Cliffs is all about. He created York Cliffs. And it's a private development of about 400 acres here on the coast of Maine. The first spot in Maine where there is really the rocks and the beaches and the crashing surf and everything. And thus became the Grand Passaconaway Inn, the Newport of the North. And it was big. It supported 400 people. It was 200 rooms. And the essence of it was to enable people to come and stay for the summer, right? And they did. Starting in 1893, they came. And they enjoyed the summer, and then they went home to wherever they were from, right? So that was the whole idea of the Grand Passaconaway Inn. So the Grand Passaconaway Inn was successful, and it enabled a lot of people to enjoy the coast of Maine, right? And for 25, 30 years, call it 30 years. But after 30 years, what happened was there were many more cars on the road. And so people didn't have to come and stay for the whole summer. So as soon as that conversion occurred, you know, the Model Ts and all the rest, then people would go where they want, and they wouldn't have to stay for the summer. They could stay for a week and go home, right? So at that point, it became a difficult way to make it work, right? So it just stayed here until 1937, when it was torn down, salvaged, and that was the end of the Passaconaway Inn. Fast forward to 1984, when I drove down Agamenticus Avenue, and I noticed that this was an empty lot. And that's when I said, well, I'm gonna figure this out. And I eventually got to talk to the then owner, who was a descendant of the Vermeils. You see, I only knew of this property, empty property, because I lived around the corner. I lived across the bay, right? And I just drove up here, and there it was, empty. Great big piece of property. Went for every different direction. On a knoll, in other words, on a hill, overlooking the Pint Cove Bay, which is part of the Gulf of Maine, right there, right? So I'm not sure it was the history at first. I became intoxicated by the history once I began to learn more about it, and the Indian chief and everybody else.